Hello everyone, Osman here, back with another video. I actually have a video planned today, another video obviously. It's going to be something a little bit different. You know, I usually do like movie reviews and everything like that for my channel mainly. I mean, I obviously do like a plethora of different content on my channel, but I actually decided to do something a little bit different. Like, you know, I wanted to do sort of like a retro movie review of the older Marvel films, the movies, the films that came out like in the 2000s, probably in the 90s, 80s, stuff like that. That's what I thought about doing as like a sort of like segment type of thing. I just thought that would be a good idea, as well as I really wanted to test the water, see how that would go. That was just like something else I thought about. I was like, you know what, I do all these other sort of videos and I have all these other ideas. Why don't I try this out for size and see if it works? Yeah, that's my plan, talking about that. The movie I am going to be reviewing today, well, before I tell you that, don't forget to like and subscribe. The movie I'm going to be talking about today is the Hulk movie, Hulk, from 2003. It stars Eric Bana, Jennifer Connelly, Sam Elliott, and I forgot the other dude's name. Josh something, I think it's Josh something. He plays Talbot in the film. He's kind of like sort of the antagonist in a way in the movie. And Nick Nolte. Nick Nolte is also in this film as well. He plays David Banner. This is a movie that I actually originally did not really find that interesting. I don't even think I really liked it as much, but sort of in a way, like, it was like still a nostalgia-filled type of movie, obviously, because this movie came out like in the early 2000s. It came out around the time, like, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies came out, and X-Men and all those other things, like Daredevil, all that stuff, like, all those. And I think I remember when I was younger, I used to collect, like, the Hulk hands and stuff like that. I remember even some of the score, from the film. The score is actually by Danny Elfman, who did the Spider-Man movies and everything like that, Batman. He also did a little bit of Age of Ultron and even the new Doctor Strange film. I always thought this film was kind of like whatever, but I rewatched it recently, and I was just like, why not? I gotta say, I don't think it's that bad. The only things I would really say in terms of complaints wise would probably be maybe just a little bit of the CG is a little dated in some aspects. The Hulk doesn't really look as super like scary or anything like that, and some of that kind of looks like a giant, I guess, and like or a giant kid. The movie is kind of weird, especially even the final act with stuff going on with there'll be spoilers, by the way. Even the movie's almost 20 years old. Why not? The final act of the film is kind of weird, like especially when he's fighting his father, and there's like a giant like cloud, and then there's like pictures and stuff like that going like that. His father is the Absorbing Man, which is kind of weird because in the comics, I think it was like a guy named Creel. He's the Absorbing Man. He absorbs like this table, for instance, right here, or this mic, and he's able to become that type of material from that type of object. That's what they illustrated in the film, and so it's interesting take on the character, but it was a weird final act. The movie can also be very slow at times, even with some of the stuff that they were exploring. I guess sometimes they would have like different dream sequences and stuff like that, so that would be a little sort of confusing. Yeah, like some of the acting I think is fine. I think with Eric Bana, he's fine in the role as Bruce Banner. He's not my favorite. Sometimes I kind of feel like, maybe sometimes he seems a little bit, I guess, somewhat emotionless, or he's kind of just like has very small moments. I mean, he does the American accent well. He's an Australian actor, so I think he does it normally. He's not that terrible in regards to that. Yeah, like, I don't know. There's so many different elements really that are interesting in this film. I think that probably like Sam Elliott as General Ross, I actually like him in that role. He was also in like another Marvel film. He was in Ghost Rider with Nicolas Cage. That was a good movie. I mean, well, not good film, like, but it was that's where I also know him from. But like, as General Ross, I saw him in this film again. I'm like, he's not a bad General Ross. I just remember William Hurt, who recently passed away, rest in peace, that he played him as the more recent General Ross, and they gave him more of a role in the MCU later on down the line. Yeah, but Sam Elliott wasn't bad as General Ross. He was actually good. I liked the take on his character. Betty, she's like another scientist, obviously, like Bruce in the comics and stuff like that, even in the other movies and stuff. And she basically just cares about Bruce and wants to see him be better and get better. Their dynamic in the film is all right. It's not bad between Betty and Bruce. I do really like the score though. Like I like the score. Like that was one of the things that stuck out in my mind really with this film, is like the score. It's like very specific. I listened to a couple of the tracks from I think Spotify. There are a couple of tracks that stood out to me, and I just kept on listening to it on repeat because I really enjoyed it and the way that it was. So some of the transitions and stuff like that, because they wanted to make whenever they would transition to another scene and stuff like that with the comic book stuff, that was kind of like just weird. I didn't think they really needed to do that as much, because I'm like, we already know that it's a comic book film. They don't have to be like, okay, well, here's this thing, here's this, let's transition to this. I guess it's an interesting visual effect, but they didn't really have to do that, because I'm like, again, we're aware that it's a comic book film. A couple scenes I would say probably that stood out to me are probably some of the Hulk scenes scenes, I guess, not just the CG really, but some scenes in the CG and even just some of the action, I think they deliver on a little bit. Some of the shots, like where he's like in the desert and he's fighting with the tanks, that stands out a lot. The part where he breaks out of like the facility and he's just like running like super fast and he has like 3 or 4 jumps, like that's actually kind of like whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. I thought that was a kind of cool like scene. Just feel like mainly the Hulk scenes are kind of the ones that stick out to me a little bit more. I guess maybe even some of the acting scenes, maybe at times. I mean, maybe, I don't know. I guess I would say like maybe the scene where, of course, before he turns into Hulk, when Talbot is like threatening him and stuff, he's like, Talbot, you're making me angry. You know, that kind of thing is fascinating. I think even the film has some good cinematography in terms of like the locations and stuff or wherever they film. There's a lot to it that is fascinating, a lot to it that's just kind of weird. Sometimes, you know, even Nick Nolte, specifically towards the end of the film, he's just like, Rah! You know, he's just like, you know, he's the type of actor. I heard he's like, you know, a little crazy on sets and stuff like that, but he's just like acting and he's just like, Rah! You know, and just making all these noises and looking weird and stuff like that. And so, you know, even the way they made him look in the film looks strange, but like, you know, he's just kind of like absorbing energy. And then you got, you know, Bruce, he's like, ah! You know, that kind of thing, screaming like crazy. You know, when you look at the way that, you know, Bruce turns into the Hulk, like sometimes he's just he's trying to be all angry, the actor's trying his best to look all angry and like, ah! You know, that kind of thing. You know, it kind of just looks like the actor's kind of just looks like a little bit like he's you know, so it's just like, you know, he looks like that quite a bit, but it's acting and they want to emphasize that he's just angry and he's just want to break free and, you know, become the Hulk and stuff, so they want to show that whole thing. Sometimes I found that to be a little bit just weird. Sometimes when he would Hulk out, it's like, okay, you're probably trying a little too hard regardless to become the Hulk. Some of the transformation scenes with him as the Hulk were actually kind of cool, especially like with that whole thing and the way that they did like the ripping of the clothes and stuff and everything. That's cool. Lou Ferrigno, who plays the original Hulk, he was in this film. It was a very small part, and then Stan Lee was in it too, so there were little parts. And then sometimes they would even have flashbacks, of course, to the original, you know, not original, but like flashbacks to they would have flashbacks to, you know, the you know, Bruce's childhood and like, that kind of thing, and then, you know, his father being abusive and stuff like that. So, you know, sort of that darker subject matter. If I'm not mistaken, I think in the comics, Bruce is the way that he is in a way, you know, his anger sort of comes up at times because of like his childhood, roughly, because of his abusive childhood. Like that's what I read about it. One thing I thought of is that I think with this film, it does delve into some things in regards to, you know, just sort of the darker, like, you know, like I said, like the darker sort of material. It's like, you know, how people refer to the MCU as just being like jokey, even in regards to the newer Hulk stuff now. This film has had a sort of seriousness that sort of resonated a little bit. So part of it was fine and part of it was just kind of like a little boring. But if I had to be honest, I think the new Incredible Hulk movie, which is, you know, also not that new, you know, the Edward Norton one, I think that's way better than this film. A little bit more entertaining, more fast-paced, more energetic, brings you and grips you into the action a little bit more, and more into the dynamics of Bruce Banner and everything about him. And this film, not so much, but either way, I still enjoyed this Hulk film enough, you know, in a way to keep me satisfied. I just, for some reason, I always had such sort of weird vitriol against it, or, you know, sort of like, oh, this film is just boring, or it's kind of like lame, and the acting, all that stuff, like, it just doesn't look like anything entertaining. Why would anybody go back? No wonder it didn't get a sequel. But at the same time, I'm like, you know what? It would be interesting if they ever did make a sequel, because I'm like, you know what? It would have been interesting, especially with this whole multiverse thing, to explore him, Eric Bana coming back and stuff, and the Spider-Man's coming back and everything. There's just so much potential with the story to do so many different things. And if they ever did make a sequel, that would be interesting. But at the same time, this movie is almost 20 years old. It's 19 years old right now this year. So much potential, I guess. It didn't really get a great critic score on Rotten Tomatoes, and I think even at the same time, it's like probably the 60s, and then on top of that, I think it's like, you know, I think box office wise the movie didn't do that great, so, you know, it didn't really have a lot of stuff working for it. Good to rewatch it. I always thought the Hulk was a cool character. He was also one of my favorite Marvel characters, you know, growing up, and aside from Spider-Man, and not my favorite Hulk iteration, but, you know, it's decent enough. If I were to give this movie a score, I'd probably give it maybe like somewhere in the 6 range, I guess, maybe 6.5. 6.5 roughly. So yeah, that's my review for Hulk 2003. I hope I didn't forget anything. The ending scene, obviously, with him being like, you wouldn't like me when I'm angry, when he's, I think, in Brazil or something, or somewhere. I don't know where he is. Or in Guatemala. That was cool. I guess implying that there was going to be a somewhat sequel, but that never happened, obviously. I plan on doing more of these retro movie reviews later on in the future. Hopefully they end up coming out the way I want it to look like. This is my first ever retro movie review. I mean, I've done movie reviews on this channel, but like, I mean retro movie reviews, like, you know, something that's from, or just like old movie reviews. There's just so much content, and it's just exciting. I plan on doing one for The Amazing Spider-Man, the first one, because that movie turned 10 this year with Andrew Garfield. Plan on reviewing that. Just rewatch that. I'm going to do a review for that soon. Moon Knight still has to be done, the review for that, so be on the lookout for that. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe, as I said before earlier in the video, and I will see you next time.